David Limbaugh. January 5, 2017, there's a big meeting in the Oval Office. The President, Joe Biden, Sally Yates, who's the Deputy Attorney General, becomes acting Attorney General at some point. There's Jim Comey and Susan Rice, National Security Advisor. What do we know about that meeting?
Well, we know, Mark, that about 2 weeks after the fact, as she was packing up her office after President Trump had been inaugurated, Susan Rice, the National Security Advisor for Obama, wrote a memo to the file to cover that meeting. And cover is in the sense of see what.
Literally minutes after Trump is inaugurated.
Correct. And what she says in the meeting is two things that are important. One is that President Obama stressed that everything in connection with the Russia investigation had to be done by the book. You know, because when you've been doing things by the book for 8 years, it's important to constantly remind each other that it's important to do things by the book.
And get it in writing.
Yes, yes. The other thing that I think is even more important than that is she said that President Obama raised the question of whether they needed to withhold information from the incoming team, meaning the incoming Trump administration. And I think there explains virtually everything we need to know about what happened afterwards.
So what does that mean?
Well, the next day after this meeting, Comey and the intelligence chiefs go up to New York to brief then President-elect Trump on the Russia investigation and to give him a very brief sliver of a briefing on the Steele dossier. And what clearly happened is when they briefed him, they did not tell him about the fact that they were investigating the Trump campaign for coordinating in Russia's cyber espionage operation. So they tell him a bunch of stuff about the cyber espionage. And then with respect to the Steele dossier, they give him the salacious piece about the prostitutes in Moscow, but they don't say a word about the principal allegations in the Steele dossier, which is that the Trump campaign is in a conspiracy with Russia to sabotage the election. And I'm convinced that the reason they did that was in order to preserve the investigation, to keep it going. The investigation had, as we've seen, a great promise to hamstring the incoming administration. It was important to put Trump at ease that he was not a suspect and that his campaign was not the focus. And I think that by...
So he wouldn't kill this ongoing investigation of him.
Right.
Of Trump world.
Right.
Did they succeed?
Yeah, I think they did. I think what ended up happening was soon afterwards they leaked out the briefing on the dossier, even though it was abbreviated, was enough of a cover for the intelligence community to leak to the media that they had briefed it, which was the trigger for getting the whole dossier out into the public domain. And once that was out there, I think this thing had a momentum of its own.
Your thoughts?
You know, to add to that, the idea that Trump and his campaign were not being targeted is undermined by the idea that they didn't plan anybody in the Hillary campaign. They didn't focus on Hillary. They'd bent over backwards, as Andy has written, to protect Hillary. And we could go through the litany of things supporting that. But they didn't go to Trump and defensively brief him. And that would have been routine. If they're really trying to stop, if their goal is to stop Russian interference in the election, then wouldn't they have warned Trump that they suspected something was going on? And they didn't do that. There's so many facts that we gloss over.
Enlist his support.
Enlist his support.
The incoming president.
They tell us now that he wasn't under suspicion. They should have briefed him on that. And also, I think it's important that we remember this salient fact. In the Strzok page emails, they shared with each other that Obama wants to know everything. This guy is a hands-on, community organizing, writ large activist. He was in control. He micromanaged to the extent that he could in all things, especially things that would advance his agenda. I don't think it's conceivable that Obama didn't know. It's way more likely that Nixon didn't know about Watergate than Obama didn't know about all the dirt that they were doing in all respects. Because we see it throughout his administration. We have to believe by circumstantial evidence alone and by Obama's activism and his attitude that he was in charge or very well apprised.
And why wouldn't he know? Yeah. The Attorney General knew. The Director of the FBI knew. The Head of National Intelligence knew. The Head of the CIA knew. The only one who didn't know was the President of the United States. Yeah, some of it was in the newspaper.
Right, except as we've just covered, everything important that was done in the way of an important decision about this ongoing investigation was done the day after they met with Obama in the Oval Office.
And it's hard to believe that's the first time that he knew what was taking place, unless they had an all-day meeting in which they suddenly start telling him what's taking place.
Right. Well, we know from what we've heard recently, and this goes to the Nunes House Intelligence Committee report, that then Director Comey briefed the National Security Council in they call it the late spring of 2016. That's very early on after Page. This is long before Page goes to Moscow, long before many of the important things in the investigation happen. They're already giving the Obama National Security Council a briefing on people who were in the Trump campaign.
And remember, in terms of Obama's attitude and what he wanted to know and was willing to know, remember him pre-announcing Hillary's innocence? I know that we're talking about the Trump investigation, but these things are necessarily interrelated, as Andy has also written about. And we brush over just the degree to which, the extreme degree to which, that they bent over backwards to not to pursue Hillary. And we could go through the writing the report before he interviewed him, not taping her interview. I mean, it's really disgusting. And let's just say if the shoe were on the other foot, and some anti-leftists were planted in high positions in the FBI, like Strzok and Page, talking about how they needed how they couldn't stand this Trump guy and how they had to protect Clinton and incriminate Trump, in so many words, reading between the lines.
If they're investigating the Russians were interfering with the election during the Obama administration. It seems to me to be interviewing Barack Obama, Biden, Clapper, Brennan, Comey, and all the rest of them about what they did and what they didn't do. It seems to me, also following up on your point, you'd have a human resource person, I think as Comey put an informant or spy, at the DNC, where their emails were hacked, or in the Hillary Clinton campaign or the Jill Stein campaign. You wouldn't be focused myopically on the Trump campaign, and the special counsel, who I want to get to in our next segment, wouldn't be focused myopically only on one campaign. We'll be right back.